Welcome back to another explainer. Today we're taking a truly fascinating 2,500-year-old Buddhist text called the Sakkapañha Sutta, and we're going to extract a highly structured psychological framework for world peace right out of it. Now you might be thinking, why on earth is a document that's 2.5 millennia old relevant to us today? Well, it's because while our technology and our societies have obviously changed drastically, our underlying human psychology, it really hasn't changed one bit. What's so incredible about this ancient document is that it doesn't just offer these vague, fluffy, philosophical platitudes about, getting along. Instead, it actually gives us a rigorous, step-by-step root cause analysis of human conflict.
So here's how we're going to break this down today. First, the paradox of conflict. Then, a divine consultation, peeling the psychological onion. The root of the problem, the matrix of action. And finally, we'll wrap up with the eye of truth.
Kicking things off with Part 1, the paradox of conflict. Why do we fight when we genuinely want peace?
To start, we really have to look at the core contradiction of both human and divine existence. It's a paradox that's honestly just as relevant today as it ever was. This is the ultimate question posed in our source text. Why do beings who wish to live without hate still end up in conflict? Think about it. The text asks us to consider why gods, humans, and frankly every other being constantly fight despite genuinely wanting to live in peace. I mean, nobody wakes up wanting a life full of enemies and malice and tension, right? We all crave harmony. And yet, hostility is literally everywhere. So why is there this massive gap between what we want and how we actually behave?
Let's move to Part 2, a divine consultation. Gods, lutes, and the Indasala cave. To get an answer to this massive paradox, the text sets up this highly cinematic, incredibly mythological scene at a place called the Indasala cave. So Sakka, who is the literal king of the gods, is absolutely desperate to know why beings constantly fight. But he's actually so intimidated to go ask the Buddha this question that he hires a musician named Panchasika to act as a sort of celestial hype man. I'm not kidding, Panchasika brings this lute colored yellow like a bale fruit and just starts singing a love song outside the cave to put the Buddha in a good mood first. It's this brilliant, slightly absurd narrative detail, right? It just goes to show that even the Lord of the Devas gets a little nervous when approaching the ultimate truth.
Okay, Part 3. Peeling the psychological onion, the Buddhist chain of causality.
So, once the Buddha is receptive to the visit, Sakka finally asks his big paradox question. And here is where the text makes a hard pivot from pure mythology straight into surgical psychology. The Buddha responds by systematically peeling back the layers of the human mind. He explains that the immediate reason we fall into conflict, even though we really want peace, is because our minds are completely bound by envy and stinginess. We get jealous of what other people have, and we fiercely hoard whatever we have. This toxic combo creates the immediate friction that leads to fighting. And honestly, this applies just as much to ancient empires fighting over vast tracts of land as it does to modern coworkers fighting over a promotion. But of course, envy and stinginess don't just magically appear out of thin air. The Buddha points out that they actually stem from our rigid preferences, basically what we find dear and not dear. We constantly divide the entire universe into things we like and things we dislike. And the second the things we like are threatened, or the things we dislike get a little too close for comfort, boom, that envy and stinginess are instantly activated.
Digging even deeper though, our likes and dislikes are born from our underlying desires. We want things to be a very specific way. And where do those desires come from? Well, they're generated by our constant churning thoughts, what the text calls vitakka. Try to imagine your brain as this highly sensitive radar dish. It is constantly scanning the room, analyzing every single piece of data, and instantly sorting everything into good for me and bad for me buckets. It's this nonstop inner dialogue, this constant evaluating of our environment that fuels our desires. And those desires fuel our preferences, which leads us right back to conflict.
Which brings us to Part 4, the root of the problem, discovering papanka.
All right, here we finally hit the absolute bedrock of the Buddha's root cause analysis. We have officially peeled the onion all the way down to the core. The crucial point here is that papanka, which translates so beautifully to mental proliferation or mental snowballing, is the actual spark that starts the entire chain reaction. Papanka is what happens when a simple sensory input hits your brain, and instead of just observing it, your mind snowballs it into this massive, complex narrative. It is literally overthinking on a foundational level. Let's say, for example, a coworker looks at you funny during a meeting. Now, objectively, that's just a simple visual input. But within 5 seconds, your brain has snowballed it into a wild narrative that they absolutely hate you, you're definitely getting fired, and your entire career is completely over. That mental snowballing creates the thoughts that create the desires, that create the likes and dislikes, that result in the envy, which ultimately destroys world peace.
Moving on to part 5, the matrix of action, the Buddha's binary framework.
So having successfully diagnosed the exact root of the disease, that mental proliferation, Sakka basically asks for the cure. Like, how do we actually stop this? And the Buddha delivers this surprisingly binary, almost algorithmic behavioral framework. He outlines a really strict filter. Basically, you shouldn't just blindly chase all joy. Instead, the Buddha splits joy into 2 distinct categories. You have to evaluate whether a specific joy grows good, wholesome qualities in your mind, or if it breeds bad, unwholesome ones. It's simple. If a joy makes you more greedy or arrogant, you avoid it entirely. But if it makes you more generous and peaceful, you pursue it.
Now, what's genuinely fascinating here is that this framework is so utterly pragmatic, it even applies to negative emotions. The text actually states that certain sorrows or frustrations should be actively pursued. No, really. Think about the sorrow of realizing you've made a terrible mistake. If that leads to a sense of spiritual urgency and helps you grow as a person, that is a sorrow you should totally embrace. But a sorrow that just leads to you stewing in bitterness and creating more unwholesome states, yeah, that one must be avoided at all costs.
Sakka immediately grasps this concept. He realizes this binary pursue or avoid matrix isn't just for abstract emotions. It has to be applied to all 6 senses. It's about what we choose to look at, listen to, or even think about. And hey, in our modern era, what we choose to look at absolutely includes mindlessly scrolling through your social media feeds. This matrix applies to our physical actions, the words we say, and even the things we spend our whole lives searching for. Every single input and output has to pass through this one filter. Does it increase wholesome states or unwholesome ones?
And finally, part 6, the eye of truth, Sakka's realization.
After absorbing this really profound psychological deconstruction and getting this incredibly practical matrix for daily living, something shifts dramatically for the Lord of the Devas. Upon hearing this breakdown, the text says Sakka attains the Dhamma eye, this perfectly spotless, dustless realization of the truth. He realizes that, quote, whatever is subject to origination is all subject to cessation. Basically, by understanding the precise origin of conflict, how it's built step by step from our own mental snowballing, he realizes that it can also be systematically deconstructed and brought to a complete end.
By simply understanding how mental proliferation causes conflict, and then actually applying that binary matrix of action, Sakka secures some incredibly tangible benefits. He literally recounts to the Buddha how this new knowledge grants him an extended lifespan in his celestial realm, a future rebirth completely free from confusion, and an absolute, unshakable certainty in the teachings. It guarantees his path to future enlightenment. Turns out, the ultimate payoff for mastering your own mind is absolute clarity.
So I'll leave you with this to ponder. Armed with this brilliant 2,500-year-old psychological matrix, how are you going to operate today? The next time you find yourself getting dragged into a conflict, can you pause and trace it back? Can you trace it back through your envy, your preferences, and your desires, all the way down to your own mental snowballing? What specific joys will you choose to pursue today, and which ones will you actively avoid because you know they're just feeding that papanka? Just think about it. Apply the filter and see how it completely changes your world.